thank you, and hello, Excel. That's what rock stars say when they get on stage to start a concert, right? And I'm a civil engineer, and I think we're rock stars too. And I hope when we've spent our 50 minutes together and we're at the end of this journey, maybe you'll agree too. So let's do a little test at the start. Who here believes that civil engineers are rock star? Hands up if you agree. Oh my God, I'm starting on a strong foot. I don't even have to try very hard. Okay, we'll do this again at the end and we'll see where we are. So, future stage, are you ready for this journey? A journey where I'm going to be sharing how civil engineering and my role as a civil engineer is a pathway to playing an important role in tackling the climate change challenge. Are you ready? Now, good manners say this is about the time I give myself a little introduction to you all. So let me introduce myself and my credentials for this conversation today as an engineer and why we have this important role to play. So I'm a chartered civil engineer, and I'm widely recognized as one of the fastest chartered engineers in the country. And I've been nominated by The Telegraph as one of the top 50 women in engineering. I have an extensive background in engineering, delivering flood risk management projects, managing teams, supervising engineers on site, influencing policy through key committees, as well as a background working on the IC's review of Grenfell Tower. I'm a TV presenter. I present on Get Set Galactic, your favorite kids' science show. Have you watched it? Okay, add that to your list now. Okay, after this, you're going to watch on iPlayer Get Set Galactic and learn some really fun science facts. But I also work as a major projects and program delivery business manager. So I run a department where all we do is delivering these incredible projects that makes things better for people and wildlife. Now, years of university debate club and competitions have taught me one thing. All good communication starts with defining your definitions. This ensures the words I say mean the same things to you, and we're having the same conversation. So let me define the terms that I'll be using in today's presentation. Number 1, flood risk. And number 2, climate change. So what is flood risk? Does anyone have any ideas? Hands up. Okay, we've got some whizzes here. Can you shout out at me? What do you think flood risk is over here? Exactly, so flooding is destroying people's properties and affecting people's lives, and flood risk is that study. Perfect. So flood risk is about the potential for flooding in a specific area, and flooding can be caused by a number of things. Heavy rainfall, like we had this morning when I was leaving home, storms, or even snow melts in those more Arctic conditions. These are all leading to that flood risk we talk about, and there are various levels of flood risk. You might understand flood risk and its levels as the depth of flood water you might see when it floods. But those who work in flood risk refer to it as an annual exceedance probability. So that is the probability that you're going to have an event of that magnitude or greater in a year. So, for example, a 1% annual exceedance probability is the chance that you have a 1 in 100 chance of that flood of that size or greater in a year. That's our first term, flood risk, and now we understand annual exceedance probability. So let's talk about climate change. Climate change is a long-term shift in temperature and weather patterns on Earth. These patterns have been made worse by some of our activities, like burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. And of course, deforestation, which can release those greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, as Michael was referring to earlier. So these gases get trapped and they heat up with the sun, and that leads to that warmer temperature that we experience, rising sea level, and more extreme weather, such as storms and flooding. But actually, something that we don't talk about as often, also, this causes drought. And this impacts our lives, because climate change is a natural process which we are exacerbating. And it's something that nature does by itself. But of course, it impacts our lives as humans, and this is where we talk about it, at the point of it impacts our lives, the environment, but also, sadly, the wildlife around us. So let's look at some facts, because I love some facts and figures, to contextualize some of these terms that we just learned. Let's bring them to life. So we have currently 5.2 million homes and business at risk of flooding, and that number is rising every decade. As the population grows, we're likely to see the number of properties built on the floodplain double by 2065. And a 0.4 to 1 meter sea level rise is predicted by 2100. And we're already experiencing hotter and drier summers. I don't know about you, we had a pretty hot summer, but summer. And we're seeing that average summer rainfall is predicted to decrease by 47% by 2070. Now, this all sounds rather scary. In fact, it could be petrifying, but I don't want you to let panic take over. This is where civil engineers like myself working in flood risk are working smart to help society adapt for a future by making the country resilient to flooding and climate change. So, what does that look like? As a civil engineer working in flood risk, this looks like flood alleviation schemes. So this looks like projects that reduce the impact of flooding to a community. That could be hard engineering structures. You might see the hard engineering like levees, dams, flood walls, those retaining structures that hold water back, that protect those communities from the rising water level. But we also have natural community-based approaches, so NFM, natural flood management. That's like restoring our wetlands, so areas that previously were floodplains, giving them back to nature. Restoring our floodplains, allowing that excess rainwater to have a place to go. We can also plant trees to kind of mitigate the deforestation actions we've taken place. We can use that as well to capture rainwater. So we see green infrastructure like rain gardens, where you might have them in your home, or permeable pavements which soak up some of the water and reduce that massive flood of stormwater. We also have incredible other schemes that you can get involved in, and I'm going to tell you about them, things that you can do practically right now. Because when we're working on these projects, we're often working hand in hand with you and the communities you live in. We work with you to communicate our plans, to see how we can get you to get the most benefit from our projects. And that's what I love about natural flood management, is that it doesn't only manage flood risk, it does something else. It improves biodiversity. It improves water quality so that your home is safe, but also the environment and wildlife also benefit. I've seen some incredible examples going out in local groups. In fact, I've got stuck in myself, in my wellies and getting in the river, and we've been designing some incredible things like leaky barriers, which are flood protection, that we use the logs and stones. And all this does is it slows down the flow of water when there's a flood. It slows it down so that it's reducing the speed, also the energy of that flood water, and that protects the homes that are downstream. And that also creates these beautiful habitats for other wildlife to make their homes. We also do something really important, which is flood adaptation. So like property level protection. Does anyone have that at home? Flood, yes, at the back, so you know what I'm talking about. So flood protections like permeable sealant. So for example, you might want to make your flood walls that just surround your home. So your personal home is protected when there's a flood, something that you can put up as a temporary barrier. You might use special sealant that means water can't ingress into your home. So you might do that at your windowsills, at your door, so that you protect your home. These are property level protection, things that you can do. Water resistant sealant, those flood protections to just surround your home. And of course, when it does flood, you can use things like sump pumps. So you go into your basement or maybe your living room and you pump the water out after it's flooded so you can get back to normal. But there's other proactive things you can do. So you can do things right now, which is engaging your planning application committee. And of course, we as engineers also do that as the Environment Agency. We consult on those planning applications to make sure that properties are being built above the flood level so that you're less likely to flood a certain home. So we don't build homes that are more at risk of flooding. And that's really important when it comes to your homes, but also critical infrastructure. I mean, you wouldn't want your hospital to flood. That would be a bad idea. So that's what we do. However, it's important to state that there is no stopping flooding. Flooding is happening and it's increasing. So at the Environment Agency, we also take on the roles of incident response. We have incident roles. So this looks like monitoring river levels, detecting incidents early, and supporting the development of emergency plans. So we work with local authorities, emergency services. We share our data so they know what to do. And of course, you might see some of us on TV communicating with you what you might need to do to stay safe. And that's really important, that you check in on that. And in fact, if you could all do one thing for me after the speech today, I'd be very happy. Can you make a promise to me? Can you make one promise to me? Yeah? I want you all to go online and find out your flood risk. So is your home at risk of flooding? If it is, I want you to sign up for flood alerts so you know when there's a risk of flooding to your home. And more than that, in fact, I'm giving you 3 bits of homework. I want you to make a flood plan. So you're going to go home, you're going to go on gov.uk, you're going to find out if your home's at risk of flooding. Homework number 1. Number 2, you're going to sign up for flood alerts. And number 3, you're going to make a flood plan. Because I want to make sure that when it does flood, that you're going to be safe. You know exactly what to do. And of course, you see some of our teams when it does flood. If unfortunately the community you live in floods, you might see us out on the ground helping in that incident response and that protective measures practically on the ground. So this is what we as civil engineers working in flood risk do. Pretty cool, right? Now, in my 9 years of working as a civil engineer, I've done so many different things. I've taken on so many roles: designer, site supervisor, BIM lead, project manager, team leader, and now business manager. But a golden thread that runs through all of these have been impactful projects and positive impact. From 2012, designing a retaining wall that was a £12 million project in Littlehampton but protected that community of flooding, to 2017, to supervising the construction of the Tulway Flood Alleviation Scheme, a £1.2 million retaining structure that protected 279 homes from flooding, to 2019, working on the appraisal of a 20 million scheme to reduce the risk of flooding to Canvey Island, to today, managing a department of over 1,000 people who are all working on delivering these incredible projects to reduce the risk of flooding and increase resilience to your communities. It's all about impactful projects and positive actions, delivered through numerous roles, like I've explained to you, which means you could do all manner of things. You might have an idea of what a civil engineer needs to be, but there isn't a set civil engineer. You could be a great designer working for a design consultant. You could be a client working with communities to understand the risk. You could be a contractor working on site to bring the designs to life. There are just so many things you can do in this broad wheelhouse that is civil engineering, and it's incredible. And I don't know many careers that you could quantify the positive impact of your work. I can quantify the positive impact of my work. From my first project as a graduate that protected 5 homes from flooding, to the Tulway one, 279 homes, to working on the Thames Estuary Asset Management Scheme, Team 2100, that protects 1.25 million homes and £200 billion of economic infrastructure. That's incredible. It looks at 170 kilometres of the Thames Estuary, 350 kilometres of flood walls, embankments, and smaller barriers and pumping stations, and our famous Thames Barrier. We do structural investigations, planning work, design, all of this leading to that positive impact. Every day, working as a civil engineer in flood risk, I have a positive impact in tackling the climate change challenge. That's what I love about my job. I make good things happen for people, for wildlife, ecology, for the environment, and for biodiversity. So, do you want to save the world and play your role in the climate change challenge? I do, and I do, as a civil engineer working in flood risk. But this is what civil engineering as a whole is. If we look at the whole industry, from my favourite engineers, William Degan, the Irish engineer who was a pioneer in railway, to Joseph Bazalgette, London's chief engineer, everything that we as engineers do throughout history is incredible. And in fact, I'm going to recant my initial hypothesis and the first question I asked you today. Are civil engineers rock stars? In fact, I'm going to say this. We're not rock stars. We are superheroes. The ICE in 2017 said, civil engineering is a vital art of working with the great sources of power of nature for the wealth and well-being of the whole of society. Is this not what a superhero does? We're the invisible superheroes that keep society running, building sustainable infrastructure, transforming your lives, interacting with every part of your life, from your house to your hospital, to your school, to your bridge, to the road, to the rail, to the airport, the energy, the flood defense, and the telecommunication networks that you interact to today. We manage all those resources, we manage them, we construct them, we do all these incredible things. And if you work in water, you manage our precious water resources, you design drainage, you do river design, and you do flood and coastal risk management. All the world is built and maintained by civil engineers. We have impact and we work on topical issues. So tackling climate change is just one of them. And I'm going to quote my IC president when I was his future leader, past president of the IC, Professor Lord Robert Mayer. He said this: the engineer of the future is going to have to solve a multitude of challenges. Problems like poverty, world hunger, illiteracy, unclean water and sanitation, as described by the UN SDG goals, clean energy, climate change, innovation, infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities. So, why not pick one of those challenges that you want to tackle? To be the change you want to see in the world, you've got to know your why. So what is your why? Because you will face challenges, but meaning makes you overcome them. When you know your why, as Nietzsche says, you can live anyhow. So to live a life with purpose, I want you to set some time aside to reflect on this and find your why. I know my why. I want to live a purpose-led life. That's why I'm a civil engineer. But I want you to find it too. So grab your phone or a piece of paper when you have time and think about your strengths, your interests, and one of these incredible problems that you want to have a role in solving, and the level that you want to do it at. And then use that to create a vision, and then a plan, a bite-sized plan about how you, all of you, can join me in this journey to saving the world. And I'll give you some final bits of advice. If you're a young person here and you think you want to be a civil engineer, I want you to consider the pathway. Is university for you? Is apprentice for you? Create a plan that works for your learning style. That's so important. And get practical experience. We develop by doing. Think about internships and shadowing. And always ask questions. Never stop learning. Okay? The key thing that I think all engineers have in common is their desire to learn and to grow and to solve problems. And finally, one thought. Raise your aspirations. Do the thing that scares you, and it'll open the whole world to you. Finally, who in this room is going to join me for the most exciting career in the world? Come on. And come on. Who in this room is going to join me for the most exciting career in the world? Yes? Oh, I have one there. And can we just ask the question that we started this conversation maybe 40 minutes ago on? The question was, are engineers rock stars? But we mooted that. The question now is, are engineers superheroes? And can I have my hands up if you agree with this new hypothesis? Are engineers superheroes, Excel Center? Thank you very much for listening. And now this time is over to you for your questions. So let's have a conversation.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to ask a question, please come up to the microphone. We've got one ready to go already. And if you're online, you can type them into the Q&A tab. Please go ahead with your question.
Would it not make more sense, rather than spending a load of money on concrete walls and groins, to use the money to buy out the homes of people who are living on crumbling cliff edges or on floodplains that are going to get flooded, whatever the engineers put in place? Give people compensation and get them moving away from places that are inevitably going to disappear underwater.
Yeah, that's a very valid question. It's something that we look at. At the very start of our processes, when we work on projects, we do an initial assessment. So we actually ask ourselves this question all the time. Does it need a structure? Because, of course, there's a carbon cost for every new infrastructure. And then when it does need a structure, let's say it's not a cliff edge project, that the best option is a compulsory purchase order and to get that community to a safer place, and there is actually an engineering solution. Then we look at what is the best solution that is sustainable, not just in terms of protecting the community from flooding, but reduces the carbon that we use in our concrete, in our steel, and we designed in the leanest and most effective way. And that's what we as engineers are doing constantly. New standards being released all the time to keep us working the very, very edge. Next question.
I think you just kind of started on what I'm going to ask. I'm an architect. Thank you very much for your talk. In our industry, there's a lot of talk about sustainable materials used in construction, moving away from concrete, steel, etc. Just wondering if there's any innovations in your industry. Obviously, we need to use a lot of concrete for flood defences and civil engineering, but if there's any other materials that are being looked at or carbon reductions in that sort of field.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. And there's some amazing case studies of projects that are already doing this. Looking at Team 2100, they looked at how they can reduce the number of vehicles going to site. Because obviously we tend to have a lot of materials, so we use barges. That reduces the amount of emission. We're using low carbon concrete, which is a new innovation. And of course, you'll also see some of our sites are green sites. So we're either using HBO or green energy. So we are constantly pushing that forward. And you can see that in the theme of this year's IC president. So the IC is the Institution of Civil Engineers. And the president this year, Dr. Professor Anusha Shah, whose theme is nature and people, has been driving this and giving the call to action for all engineers to think of more effective ways. And you can see some of that already rippling through our industry. We're being way more sustainable in our solutions. And we're working with architects quite a lot, with BSI and lots of other industries to make sure that we are working in collaboration, because the solution is going to be working together to come up with new solutions. Thank you for your fantastic question.
You mentioned the Thames barrier. Do we need to build a new one, or can the current one be modified enough?
I will not be commenting on that question at the moment. Thank you very much. Next question.
What role do you see civil engineers playing in solving the problems of the continual release of untreated sewage into rivers and the sea?
I think Tideway was a fantastic project, if many of you know about the Tideway project. So in London, we have the combined sewers. So when Judge Joseph Bazalgette, in the Great Stink of London, he came up with a solution of building 21 kilometres of sewers, and these were combined sewers. And now, as a population grows, even though he designed for a greater population, I think of 9 million in London, as the population grows, that's overloading his engineering system. So we're seeing those combined sewers overflow in storm conditions. And the Tideway project went to address this by building this amazing, sewer project that's actually been reducing the excess sewer overflow into the Thames. And we can see that already making such great strides in reducing the release of human excrement into the River Thames. So that's a fantastic project, and I would tell you all to look at that online. And there's a great documentary, episode 2, that I feature on talking about this very project on Channel 5. So please do go and check that on Channel 5 later on tonight if you do have time. That's a fantastic question.
Just follow up, what about outside London?
I think lots of different parts of the country are working on different engineering solutions, and I do actually like the devolved idea where, parts of the country are looking at engineering solutions that suits their communities. So our projects are community-led. We do a lot of stakeholder engagement in that initial assessment phase. Then it leads to our strategic outline business cases, then our outline business cases, and then the full business cases before we get to that construction phase. So it's not just about having one generic solution and copying London all around the world. It's about making sure that each project is fit for purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As a retired engineer, closely involved in the planning of the railways outside this building, we do seem to have a problem in this country with time and cost overruns. How do you see the industry sorting itself out?
This is the biggest question in our industry, so I'm going to try and answer that as succinctly as possible for the audience today. But taking my hat as a building information lead, which is a massive part of my career, 2 years doing that role, I do think we need to use technology. Building information modeling allows us to be able to see our projects in 3D, 4D, even 5D. So we can see where there might be clashes and inefficiencies. Doing this will reduce our issues on site. We can also kind of minimize clashes. We know that saves us lots of money, and that also prevents those program delays that can be so significant and have become almost part of our industry. That's what people think engineering projects are. They're over budget and late. I think if we use more technology like that, we work to be compliant in those standards, that would be incredible. And the latest standard that BIS released, I think last year, I did a panel on that, would be a fantastic place that we are using as a baseline for the whole of industry. And secondly, I'd like to say, I think there's a space for us to also look at, working the way that we see in highways industry, where they use modular construction, where they have similar assets that they're replacing or similar assets that they're building. Instead of treating every project as a novel project, they're looking at standards and economy of scales and that consistency. So if we take that manufacturing mindset to civil engineering, we might actually get more efficient in our project programs and, of course, the cost, which can be a huge, not a positive branding for us as engineers, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your fantastic question.
First of all, thank you very much for your very energetic, very informative.
Thank you.
As another retired engineer, but still very much involved in local engineering work at community level, and still very much involved with the institution, I'd be interested in your views as to, whilst the engineers have the answers to the problem, the solutions are not getting over to the public, and it's not getting over to the politicians. Engineers typically are very quiet, they get on with what they're told to do, but knowing full well that the decisions which have been taken are incorrect. How can we get that message over to the public and to the politicians?
I'm so pleased that you're a fellow member of the institution, and this is a conversation we often have in one of our committees, our communication committee, as part of the ICA, which I sit on. The conversation is, how do we empower engineers? In fact, that was one of the lessons of the ICE review that was led by Peter Hansford when we were learning lessons from Grenfell Tower. How do we empower engineers to use their voice throughout the process, so when they see failures, they speak up? And this is going to be a culture shift we're going to see in our institution, led by institution to its members. Training is going to be important, and continuous professional development, and not just technical professional development, but actually having communication skills. And I see that. I've gone to an IC communication course before. I would like to say it was effective. That would be for you guys to vote on. But that's been really useful in allowing me as a technical engineer to be able to advocate and speak about the technical subjects in a way that a wider audience can understand. So that we're going to have those part of that journey. It's going to be taking the lessons from Peter Hansford IC Grenfell Tower review, the work that the IC Communication Committee is doing, and being led by fantastic presidents, our current and our future ones. And thirdly, I think we all have to take some personal responsibility. I went to that course. I started doing YouTube videos explaining flood risk so that we could understand who were my age, my generation, millennials, and younger, so they could, they could get the rationale. And I think we all have to take that personal responsibility. If we see a problem, we have to pick that problem and say we are going to help change it. So that means I want to see engineers going and joining their planning application committee. They're sitting there, they're volunteering on those design review panels. We do need their skill sets, especially retired engineers like yourself. And I want to see them getting involved in all parts of society, just like the engineers of old did. William Degan, Bazalgette, they did not sit on the sidelines. They worked in policy, politics, and they were true advocates for the profession. Let's go back to our roots as engineers. Thank you for that question.
Thank you very much for that. And if you are willing, I'd be most grateful if we could have a few minutes to talk about your details after this presentation.
Absolutely, I would love that. Meet me over there. Any other questions?
We've still got some time, so maybe I can sneak one in.
Okay.
Can you tell us what's the favourite project, or perhaps the most interesting project you've worked on? Can you tell us a bit about that?
I would like to say my first project, actually being on site, managing on site. I think that was such an acceleration in my development because it was such a challenge. And I think the challenge is always the opportunity for growth. And on the Tarway scheme, it was a challenge. It was so wet. And anyone who works on earthworks knows you can't do earthworks in wet conditions. So we were trying to constantly innovate. How will we stick to our program? The community had had devastating flooding a decade before. They were very emotional about the project. Many of them were still living in caravans and weren't back in their homes. So it was a huge importance that we were able to deliver before the next winter. And that meant always looking at new solutions. I remember doing literature research on cutting edge technology that we could use to maybe roll quicker and get to the the kind of technical specification required in terms of quality for us to progress with construction. So it literally kept me on the edge. I was constantly researching, constantly innovating, and constantly communicating with a community that was quite emotional about the project, as they should be, and making sure that I was, empathetic of where they were going, what they were feeling, but also communicating the engineering constraints in the most effective way and how I was looking to solve it for them. So that project taught me a lot and was really critical to my development as an engineer. I wouldn't be the engineer I am without that project, I don't think.
Right, any more questions? We have one more coming up.
Hi. So earlier this year, we went on a New Scientist trip to David Gow's farm, and he is doing a lot of rewilding work, and he's quite a big advocate of using beavers for water management. I just wondered if you had been involved in any beaver dam flood reduction risk projects.
I actually just read a paper on that 2 days ago. That's quite topical. The EA just published a paper on it. We actually have a team that lead on beaver projects. There are constraints on beavers. Beavers can be destructive to infrastructure, but they also are engineers themselves. They help us, they're engineers. If anyone knows what beavers do, they're fantastic natural engineers. So it's about working with them and also with the constraints that they provide. So I would really refer everyone to that paper because it's recently published and it's in the public domain. I found it really interesting. I personally don't work on beaver projects, but I love keeping up to date on the latest CPD, as is my public, as an engineer, we have that professional commitment to continuously learn. So I would definitely recommend an engineer or non-engineer go check out that paper. I think it was just recently published. I read it 2 days ago. Fantastic project. And I'm really keen on rewilding projects, actually, in general. That kind of fits our natural flood management, so NFM. And that's something that we're doing more and more. There's been a body of research. I think I worked on the very start of it when I was working the Oxford scheme, so that was 2017. And we were presenting on it then. Obviously, that's become much more robust. And they're doing some research and putting case studies to quantify how NFM relates to our annual exceedance probability. So we can actually quantify what does a debris dam do in terms of AEP, because we know how to do that for a hard engineering structure, but how do we do that for soft engineering projects? And I'm very interested in that and to see how that develops, because I think that will be fantastic as well. And on a final note, I think it's really important that we all kind of get involved where we can do, because when we think about rewilding and NFM, we think about engineering and massive projects, but it isn't. I can tell you this from working on a plastic-free group that I co-founded, 4 or 5 years ago. You can do micro projects as a part of your community. Community is about taking that responsibility and doing something. So it could be litter picking, it could be growing, these amazing different, bee happy plants that help our environment. We can take all those personal actions, and I want us to kind of go with the call to action of doing an action, even one thing that will make things better for our climate and our environment.